All right, thank you, Julian. So it is a great pleasure to be here. For those of you who've come to this conference before, you've probably seen me before. I've been involved in the conference for many years now. And when the organizers came to me and said, what can we do? What should we do this year? But what we have not done in quite a while is have a conversation about allyship. So we've put together what I think is a super panel here to discuss allyship. And we've got 5 major questions. Each one of us is going to take a lead on one, and then we'll open it up on the panel, and then we'll open up to you at the end of the session. Randall Peterson, I'm a professor in the Organizational Behavior Group, and I want to have each of the panelists go ahead and introduce themselves briefly. So why don't we begin with Andy?
Hi everyone, I'm Andy Dent. I'm Director of DE&I at Bain in the UK. I identify as a gay man, but that's not how I got into D&I. That's an assumption everyone makes. Years and years ago, I was a male PA in a very male-dominated department, with all the other hundreds of PAs in the company were female, and that's how I really got into it, because it was kind of right role, wrong gender, and you can imagine that kind of threw up all kind of interesting conversations. I've been a D&I professional for 20 years. Next year, I didn't think I was staying as long as that, but I was just saying earlier that actually D&I as a topic is evolving and growing all the time, and ultimately what keeps motivating me in doing it is that kind of desire to make a difference and to bring my lived experiences to the workplace. Thank you.
All right, go ahead. Ashley?
Thanks. Oh, you can hear me. Hi, I'm Ashley Dartnell, and I'm the Global Senior Director of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion for Boston Consulting Group.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Leo?
Hi, everybody. Leo Johnson. I had a sustainability company which I sold to PwC a while back for a very tiny amount, and enough to buy half a house in Brent. And I head up the disruption and innovation team at PwC, which is brilliantly interesting, looking at what's coming down the track, how can we respond to it. And in my spare time, I do things like make wine with my neighbors in Brent. For some reason, it's called Brent Crude. I don't know why, but it's great to be here. And please, Vyla.
All right, thank you, Vyla. Thank you, Leo. Vyla, go ahead.
Hello, nice to see some familiar faces here. Vyla Rollins. I am currently the Executive Director of London Business School's Leadership Institute. I'm also a coach for degree and exec ed programs, and a program director for custom programs. Organizational psychologist by training, don't let that worry you. And ignore my accent in some ways, because it may sound American. It is. Actually, I was born in Denver, but I've been living in London 38 years.
All right. So, we're going to start, when we started talking about what we wanted to do with this panel, one of the things that we were interested to talk about was really kind of what is the meaning of allyship. And having done, I hosted an allyship panel for the Women in Business conference, right? And rather surprisingly, it was like this was harder for me to think about, right? Because maybe I'm, too close to it in some way. So Vyla, why don't you start us off by just really helping us understand what allyship is?
Well, that's a good question, which is why I posed this. So just to be transparent, when the organizing committee came to me to talk about the conference, they wanted to use me as a sounding board to think about the design and some of the things that we might do. And, it just struck me during the conversation, all of a sudden, a lot of people were talking about allyship, but I could hear different nuances about what that might mean to them in terms of their responses. So I actually said to them, one of the things I think we should do is maybe ask those who are here today what they think, allyship is, or what they think are the attributes of those who are effective allies. I see somebody nodding there in the front. And this is what we came up with. So I think there was a QR code that was up during the break. These are some of the things that you folks said. And looking at this, it just reinforces to me how important it is to really engage with people, in a curious way in terms of, so, if I'm going to be an ally for you, what does good look like for you? Because what, good, effective, supportive might be to one person, it might be different for another person. And, again, I look at these things and I also see, there's a bit of, what we would call mentorship in there, giving advice. There's a bit of, advocating, which is sponsorship. Like, I want you to, if you're a person in an authority role, I want you to make sure that I'm known in certain circles, in the organization or in the community for what I could do. So, yeah, I guess for me it's, let's remember this isn't a monolithic concept. It means different things to different people, and it's worth spending the time, asking that question of people.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll talk more about that in the panel. Any of our other panelists want to add comment on that? We're all on the same page? Okay, great. Thank you, Vyla. Let's move on to our second question, which is really about where do we get it wrong? What are the common mistakes that companies are making when it comes to allyship and support for the community? And we're going to ask Andy to kick us off here.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as you can see, there's a lot of words there, and I think to sort of just echo the point that's already been made, like this will mean different things to different people and will potentially mean different things to different organisations depending on where they are in their DE&I journey. I thought just I'd share some things of observations of where I think organisations I've worked at may have not got it quite right, but also where I've observed perhaps other organisations as well, again, not getting it quite right. I think you have to sort of make sure you understand why you would like an ally program or an allyship program. It's probably not just enough for someone to say, oh yes, we need this, but why do we need it? And ultimately, where is that driver coming from? Is it coming from the LGBTQ plus community? Is it from the business? Is it from external pressures? And I think that throws up some challenges, because let's sort of not forget that all of kind of LGBTQ plus employee network groups were set up initially as a support network and often as a safe space for people from that community to come together. And rightly or wrongly, there are still people who are not comfortable about being out at work, and you have to kind of then work how does that then work with the kind of ally program, because potentially you'll get people who are not out maybe coming working with allies and therefore potentially outing themselves. And equally, you can't have two running in isolation of each other, and I've seen that happen sometimes as well. One thing I observed very early on is people generally can't self-identify as an ally, and I'll give you a very quick example. Many years ago, a previous firm looking to launch an ally program, there was an initial event, come along, find out a bit more about it, and I asked a very senior person if he was going, and he said, no, I haven't got time, but I'm an ally anyway. So I said, really, can you give me an example of anything you've done that would demonstrate that to your team and indeed the wider firm? And of course he couldn't. So I think some people will identify as an ally even though they actually are not doing anything to back that up. I think there's also a piece around don't assume that allies will necessarily do what they've signed up to. So they might need to do some training, they might agree to do different things and support the LGBT community in various things in different ways, but don't assume they're going to sign up, don't assume what they're going to do, they've signed up to. And I think particularly sometimes with very senior allies, you might say, I've said to them in the past, okay, will you be the LGBTQ plus lens at the board, or will you advocate for that community at its own? And they're like, well, I don't know that that's what I really envisage my role as being. I think, well, I probably do. I think also the really thing that most surprised me, and I think this is in 2013, and we've probably moved on a little bit since then, is but some people asked me, if I don't sign up to be an ally, or I'm not seen as an ally, does that make me homophobic, or will people think I'm homophobic? Now, that was quite a worrying thing at the time, but I think for some people it's a very real feeling. And I think the final thing I would say, and I've left my number one frustration till the end, is there is sometimes with allies, there is sometimes a sense of making it a little bit gimmicky. It's very easy to give allies a lanyard or a mug or a badge or a sticker. I think it's important, you have to find a way to how people can identify allies within your company. But I've also seen people fall over themselves to get a rainbow lanyard or a mug, and people, just because you have a rainbow lanyard or a mug doesn't make you an ally. And I think sometimes there is a tendency just to go after the gimmicky element of making it look good. Or I've got a rainbow lanyard, therefore that makes me an ally. It doesn't. And I think that's just some views I've sort of seen over the years. But I think as well, ultimately, the thing is, you just have got to don't do it for the wrong reasons, do it for the right reasons, because like with any D&I initiative, it has to be authentic.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to comment? I mean, I think I want to really reinforce it has to be more than a fair weather friend. And I've seen that way too often where people will say, yeah, I'm an ally, and they'll even, but as soon as it gets a little rough, or as soon as there's a real issue on the table, then it just kind of goes quiet, right? That's not allyship for me, right? That's going with what, is kind of popular right now, fair weather friend, more than anything else. And I think, I'd like us to get into what some of those other things, really are here as we're talking about too. Did I see a hand? Anybody else? Leo, did you want to comment on?
I kind of think the role of ally is in fact huge. And I want to try to add one thing maybe onto this and see if this resonates with anyone. Can I start by my favorite, I do a lot of try to do gazing into what's coming around the track. And my favorite predictor of the future is Marilyn Monroe, who says sometimes good things fall apart so that better things can fall into place. Operative word being sometimes, okay? And we're in this completely Marilyn Monroe moment. It seems to me, I don't know if mood of the room, the next 5 years of all of our lives, next 10 years, are they going to be smooth waters or are they going to be choppy? What do people feel? Smooth or choppy?
Choppy.
I kind of feel choppy too. We've got this arsenal of tech which could either replace human intelligence or allow us to solve problems at a scale we've never, the delta between the good and the bad. Okay, so the question is, how does this relate to allyship, to any of us in this room? And I think there's absolutely a form of performative allyship that's box ticking, that does some good stuff, sure, but it's not addressing the big stuff. And it's dangerous if it actually displaces the big stuff. And I'm thinking of two amazing thinkers. One is Audre Lorde with her line that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And the other is Marcuse when he talks about repressive tolerance, where you have stuff that just pays lip service but does nothing to look at and try to address the underlying conditions that are giving rise to the problem. And where I think an ally is important is an ally is someone who maybe has some contact with the structures which are touching the underlying conditions of discrimination. Maybe they've got that contact. And if there can be a deep relationship between the ally and someone who's coming at it from a diverse perspective, whatever that diverse perspective is, then it's going to be those minority viewpoints who will be feeling it. They'll be feeling, where does an economic system that's right now taking us off a cliff, that is patriarchal, that is hierarchical, that is ecocidal, that is absolutely not working. It's minority voices who've got the capacity, the empathy, the intuition, the lived experience to see what does that system look like. So for me, there's a vital conversation between the ally and the minority voice to go really, really deep and to have radical listening that truly does accept and absolutely allow that person to feel everything they're feeling and to capture all the anger and all the passion and to harness that then to try to address some of those underlying conditions and to feed it back into those structures and to drive some change. So for me, that role of the ally is almost an activation role, and to feed it back from the individual into the system and try to drive some change.
Yeah. Any of the other panelists want to comment?
I think I would just add that in my experience, like a lot of boards of organisations or excodes, that they are not necessarily have representation from the LGBTQ plus community. And I think it's really important that if you are a senior ally, I think you have to properly agitate for change and properly agitate and be that voice. And I think that's what you don't always see. You do see it. There are some brilliant allies out there, and we should absolutely acknowledge that, because I don't want people to think that this is a negative thing, but you've got to be prepared to put your head above the parapet and speak up.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think it's really important for us all to say, I mean, to build on some of the things that Leah was talking about. You know, we've seen progress go in reverse recently, and if you look at, in a broader sense of history, it's not a foregone conclusion that it's going to get better again, or in our lifetime. It can literally go backwards and stay backwards for a very long time. And we are kind of by definition always going to be a minority community, right? And therefore, you know, we need support of people who are willing to really, when it gets rough, when drag queens are, are targeted for, very retrogressive legislation as they are in the U.S., right? That we need allies, we need prominent straight allies to stand up and say, this is wrong, stand with us, rather than, because although that's not a career I want to have, right, as a gay man, it's one that, well, I see that stuff and know that it's only a couple steps away from me, right? And, that terrifies me.
Randall, can I just add something on the Audre Lorde quote? I think the other job of the ally is to get the hell out of the way as well. And really to, it's not just activate, but to empower and transfer leadership and bring up a next generation of people with those minority perspectives and unlock that talent. Do everything you can to unlock that talent. I think that is also the fundamental task.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
Okay, a typical BCGer, I'm going to have the last word. I'm going to bring in a framework, and I'm going to bring in some data. So I think that our job as corporate leaders and your job as future corporate leaders is to be the agitators and to be the activist allies and LGBTQ people who really change the world and who really support the LGBTQ community in the world and allow them to thrive and flourish. And so what I really want us to do is to move us from the continuum of many of those really blah words on the screen, which are really passive allyship, to a much more activist form of allyship, a form of allyship in which we are super, super committed to our LGBTQ brethren and sistren and really help them to be included and to thrive both within the workplace and in their personal lives. And okay, so bringing in the data, we just did a huge study this year around inclusion. And, 27,000 people, 16 different countries, yada, yada, yada. And what we found was that the things that drive inclusion, and inclusion is really important because it leads to higher levels of motivation, higher levels of ambition, higher levels of productivity, and also retention, is feeling included, which is driven by leadership commitment. And that's not just talking the talk, that's really walking the walk. And if you're from a professional service firm like us, it's investing in your ERGs, it's investing in your thought leadership, it's really putting your money where your mouth is. If you're working in industry, it's marketing to the LGBTQ community. It's actively incorporating their needs within your product portfolio. So it's not a passive form of allyship, the lanyards, the stickers, etc., which is really going to change the world. It's all of you as a future leaders who have to actively and strenuously really support yourselves and help us as your allies to learn and to advocate on your behalf. Okay, so I'll get off my podium, but I feel very strongly that this is a really important issue at this time. And, you know, of course, drag queens in America, but also, you know, Uganda, you know, the wave of repressive legislation that's, you know, going through the world at this point is really dangerous, and we need to fight against it.
All right, thank you. Yeah. We've kind of started to blend into our next question, which is really about the future of allyship. What is it going to look like, you know, in the future? You started a little bit of, you already started us down that track a bit, Leo, but do you want to add anything else
No,
beyond?
I think I've shot. I get out of track. Exactly what you just
He's
said.
done your bit, right?
Exactly what you just said. Yeah.
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 Okay. So we're going to need some help navigating some choppy waters, right?
I think it's like unlock the power of the perspectives. That's, you know, what Clay Shirky calls the cognitive surplus, just the sheer talent. And, you know, there's no amount of, I studied environmental economics. There's no amount of applying these formalist technologies is going to change our perspective around a planet that, you know, we're currently binning. We're binning the place. We're binning it. And, you know, the word I love most on this is love. You know, it feels like the big project. We've got to fall back in love with the world and each other. That's the number one task. Forget the economics for the moment. Right? That's the project.
Great. Thank you. Because I want to keep building on a comment that Ashley made about building this kind of inclusive community. Let's get into like what we think about in terms of how we do that. What actions do we need to take? And I'll, you know, I mean, for me, I know one of the big challenges is in the LGBTQ plus community, it's very easy for, particularly for the white gay men, to take over the broader agenda, right? So anybody, if you were going to be an ally, it needs to be to a much broader group of people than the ones who are, I'm saying that as one myself, right? I don't have all the same, you know, issues and concerns that the people who aren't white or women or, you know, transgender, like that agenda is related to mine, but it's not, that agenda is not just mine. So it's really important we reach out to and really get a much broader view of that community if we're going to make this work. Ashley, you looked like you were going to add comment.
Well, I was just going to say that I promised you some data about inclusion, and in terms of the research that we did, about a third of what drives people's feelings of inclusion or that leadership commitment. An additional third of it is your direct line manager behavior and the psychological safety you feel in your work environment. And so that direct line manager is super important to your ability to work constructively and to be productive and happy. And then the final is more structural things, you know, the kind of benefits, processes, policies, etc. And so I think that as people who are leading companies and organizations, if we focus on the investment at the leadership level, but then also in those day-to-day behaviors that allow people to be psychologically safe and to work constructively, that will go a long way in terms of getting us to a much more inclusive environment.
Yeah. Yeah, and this.
Vyla, you want to comment?
Yeah, well, and this may be a controversial comment, but you know, for me, it's also, you know, stepping into the opportunity of coaching upwards. right? And saying, circling back to what I said in the beginning, being comfortable saying, here's what works for me, or you've made this comment about me, that's not my lived experience, but, here are some things that might help you, understand some of the things, that are empowering or important to me. So, I think there's that educational bit. And sometimes I know that can feel like, oh, it's like, ugh, more education, more kind of, me explaining myself. But I think, this is, for some people a new territory still, and it's evolving. I mean, we were just talking about, how, things are changing, not only by the year, but by the week, by the month, right? And those things, I'm sure are, and those conversations are impacting on you, how you think about things, how you think about going through the world. So I think it's important to, we have to stay in dialogue about this, or as Ashley was saying, it's, it's an active, proposition that we need to think about that, goes up and down or back and forth in terms of, relationships in organizations.
And also faith that people can learn, right? It's what you're saying is that, like feeding back up or around is really important because we are capable of learning and changing our mind.
Yeah. Change only, and I say this to students, change only happens, or change happens through conversation. Yes, there's advocacy in there. Yes, there's standing, but change starts by, that essence of having a conversation.
Yeah, and I want to follow up on one I think was one of your main points. Like, it's really important. That is, people who want to do the right thing for the right reason. They get excited, they jump in there, but they're basing it on, their ideas about what's right, as opposed to what's right from my point of view. And I've certainly had that at the individual level, where once somebody you're working with finds out you're gay, they jump to a whole bunch of conclusions, and you're like, do I say something? Because I don't want to turn that off, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, that's not me. That's not me, my version, my lived experience. So the most important thing in allyship is your ability to listen, right? And then respond and learn from that.
Yeah. Be
And
curious.
I think it's, such a critical point that a great ally listens and learns, right? Not just kind of like, I think I know the answer here and I'm going to protect you or look after you, or it has to be a partnership. It has to work together, stand arm in arm, working together.
Yeah.
I would just add something to that. I think as a white gay man, there aren't many times in my life where I could say I felt privileged, but I think one thing that struck me in the last few years is that within the LGBT community, I have a huge responsibility to be an ally for those underrepresented groups within that community. And I think if we're talking about what the future looks like, allyship is not just people outside the community, it's also, within the community. And I think that, unfortunately, if you look at, various external factors, there is an awful lot of negativity out there at the moment. And I think we have to, I feel an enormous sense of responsibility. I'm not sure, but I probably am the most senior out gay person at Bain in London who's not on the general consulting side. That's not a label, but it's just a reality. And I have a obligation to make sure that my team and sort of the wider community, I do my best to role model behaviour, but also use my platform, even as a D&I professional, to call things out when it needs to be done.
No, I think that's a great and a really important point about, also as a gay white man of a certain age, right, and a certain level of achievement in my profession, I need to be an advocate and an ally to those in the broader community who don't have that privilege, who aren't yet accepted more broadly. And I think it's really important for all of us in the room to consider when you need to be an ally to a broader set of people beyond your immediate community as well. And so that we can both be in receipt of allyship from great, people, but we also need to be allies for others as well. Okay. We also had a question about it was building on. We've kind of naturally flowed into this. what does it take to build an inclusive community. But I wanted to make sure, Ashley, did you get everything that you wanted to say about building an inclusive community?
I think so. I think that, yes, I think I've said my piece for the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Any other final comments before we open up to the audience for some questions? No, we're ready?
No, I would
Go
just say, I think it's, I mean, I completely agree with what Ashley says. I think you shouldn't underestimate, if you're a line manager, you shouldn't underestimate the impact that can have on the people that work for you. But I also think that it's really important that I think there is still, even sometimes in the workplace, there is a sense that LGBTQ plus stuff is not quite as important sometimes as the other areas of diversity. And I think that is something else we also just have to be mindful of, because people's lived experience is their lived experience. And there are multiple lived experiences in this panel, in this room, beyond. And I think that's a challenge, to make sure that people don't feel that their voices or that particular community is marginalised, which is, again, is why allies are so important.
Okay, great. So we're going to turn to the audience at this point for your questions. Anybody want to? Oh, we've got a hand up in front here. Got a couple of hands up. Right, both there. These two. Yep. Okay.
Hi, thanks so much for insights. I think my question's around, are there any specific examples that you could think of in terms of actions of allyship that you felt was particularly memorable?
I would say in my previous firm, which was the law firm Clyde & Co., one thing that had a huge impact was when the members of the Manchester office, the management team, attended Manchester Pride with the LGBTQ group. And that was something they chose to do on their own. They weren't asked to do it. They made a conscious decision to do it. But that I would probably say, certainly prior to joining Bain, that was probably the most single biggest thing that added impact, because it really demonstrated that they were prepared to kind of put themselves out there, front and center. Because not everybody, even myself, I'm not a person who loves going on marches or pride events, but I think for a lot of people that was outside their comfort zone, but it did make a real difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know for me personally, one that was profound for me was, and seeing not just the gay ones, but a broader array of police officers at Gay Pride. I know when I grew up, that was the arm of oppression, deep, reservations about the police. So to see them widely represented, just being there, at those events was, something that really shifted my thinking about my level of acceptance, the acceptance of me, in the broader world.
For me, we had a Pride conference in Bangkok last November, almost a year ago. And our people chair showed up somewhat unexpectedly. And I was so struck because we were having all these different breakout sessions and things. And he just kind of rolled up his sleeves and sat down and was just listening really hard to what people were saying. And it was very quiet. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't something where people weren't putting posters up or big light shows in front of the office or anything, going to Pride marches. It was just a really simple, flew to Bangkok, spent 2 days with us, and sat there and took in what people were saying. And that kind of quiet activism was really, for me, very moving. And Stefano and Liam know who I'm talking about, and I think that it's an indication of his huge commitment.
Can I build on that?
Yeah, for sure.
On the listening thing. So I trained and volunteered at the Samaritans branch in Brent. And I don't know if anyone's ever done that in the room, but the training is incredible, because it just makes you realize how crap you are at listening. And they teach you, they teach you how to do rubbish listening, so you can actually see yourself. And then you are confronted with people who are in the deepest pain. And it turns out the thing that is the extraordinarily powerful thing is to just do that listening and proper listening, where they really feel that you are accepting them and everything that they are feeling. And that maybe for the first time in a very long time, someone's really got their arm around them. And the crazy thing with that is the realization that for them, the way up is actually to allow them to go down, to allow them to feel the very worst thing that they're actually feeling, which they're maybe not acknowledging to themselves. And that's the feeling that makes them feel they're not alone. So that, if you can master that and not do all the techniques we use not to listen, to offer a solution, to distract them with there's the good news, there's still this, to feel the tug of your phone, like any of us can do that to any of the people we're with all the time. So I think that act of deep listening is a very profound piece of allyship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, if I could sort of build on that in a sort of sideways fashion, I think, for me, I've seen individuals who they don't necessarily they're not totally articulate, if for want of a better word, of what they feel their allyship might mean, but they're curious. They're like, actually, I want to be here because I want to understand. I don't know how I can help, but if I listen and I talk to people, maybe I can find ways of helping. So being very honest, right, with people about that. So, and that's been very, for me, seeing individuals do that, very powerful. It's not, about having it all figured out.
Great. I hope that addressed the question. We have another question here. There we are.
Hi, this is amazing. Thank you. I'm wondering, Ashley, you were just talking about the not doing passive but doing active allyship. And I wonder if all of you have seen things that companies have done that have not been working really well, so that we don't go in the same pitfalls, or things that have been done that might represent a misunderstanding of allyship.
Sure. I think we started talking about some of it, and we can probably talk a little bit more, Andy, talking about people taking on mugs and little stickers for their office, but actually not really doing anything with it, right? Or people there for the wrong reason because they don't want to be perceived as homophobic. I think those things are all very real. But I think Andy, you've probably got more experience than anybody here on that.
I mean, one thing it's a good question. I mean, one thing I didn't mention is I think sometimes it's also not just about turning up at events and showing your face. Most people, or not most people, it's very tempting to be, want to go to an event that may have nice food or it might have drinks or whatever. And I think sometimes in Pride Month, obviously it's an opportunity to celebrate, and I think it should be a celebration. But equally, there are people, I've seen many people who think being an ally is just turning up at drinks or popping to the pub or maybe attending a meeting, and they've done it. And I think it's a lot more than that. But I think the point to stress is, the question I was asked was intentionally on what I've seen doesn't work. I've seen a lot of things equally work, and I think every organisation is going to have a slightly different experience. One thing I will just share very quickly is, in my previous role, and I was there 5.5 years, I intentionally let 2 partners think I was straight because they assumed I was, and I never corrected them. Now, that was probably a bit strange thing for me to do, but what was a very interesting experience was they throughout that time thought they were allies, and I pretended to be an ally as well, and actually they were like, gosh, you're so much better at this than we are, Andy. And I'm like, right at the end of the Pride, I said, actually, I'm a gay man. And they were like, oh gosh. And then they were like, you could see the kind of panic in their face that they were like, we're not very good at this, are we? I'm like, no, not really. So I think there's so many things small things that need a bit of finessing, but equally we shouldn't forget that allies can be a huge force for good as well.
yeah, if we're really going to make progress, they're necessary. And what about build on what you said and connect it to something Vyla said about, the opportunity for them to learn. Because I think the mistake, in my mind, the mistake that companies make is they start some kind of a network, right? And then they just stop there as though we've ticked the box and we're done now, right? When in actual fact, it needs to be progressively, we need to be taking on more and more if we're actually making progress. Otherwise, we took one step forward and stopped.
I think,
And that's not good enough either,
yeah.
right? So, real company, the companies are great, are on a long-term project, right? And if they know that up front and they continue to work at it, right, then they will discover along the way the things that need to be different. But it's that declaring victory and stopping after the first stage that is the thing I've seen just way too much of in corporate programs. We've ticked a box, we're done. Over.
Can I add, after Ashley, do you have a comment on that?
I was just going to say that the companies that I've seen that are an issue are the ones with a tick box mentality, and really to make it effective and to be more of an activist ally, you really have to invest real time and real money, and that's the bottom line really is. And if you do that, you'll see change. Sorry, go on.
But I'm also looking at what's the percent of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies that are LGBT? It's less than 0.5%. So something is going wrong within these organizations. There's some failure of the learning to translate itself into the organization and for the organizations themselves to change and really be properly inclusive and be managed by people who've got these vital perspectives. I'm really interested in your take as an organizational psychologist. Why is that happening? And what could any of us in the room do to try to change that?
Just one thing I would say on that.
That's a whole new conference in itself. We can have 5 days on that, but yeah, go.
I think that the metrics are really important. Like, people have not traditionally measured the LGBTQ community for a lot of reasons. It's just we haven't been able to legally in much of the world, and so if you can't measure it and you don't know, it's really tough to promote it. So getting to a situation where companies are doing more active self-ID is really important. So that's one thing, and then the second is really active sponsorship of, for example, the LGBTQ people that you have in your organization, to get them up that career ladder. So I would say those are the two things that would really make a difference.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And I guess building on that, I think, one of the things I often see organizations doing is trying to turn this into an intellectual exercise or a communications exercise. And if we're slick in terms of how we talk about this, and the optics and the visuals, that will help. Well, yeah, maybe, maybe. Ashley, you probably have views on that. But I think there's so many things that need to be, thought about. I probably shouldn't say McKinsey 7S's, right? With somebody from Bain. But
Bain and BCG.
Oh, BCG. But you have to think about what structures, what systems. What in terms of how we think about people's performance, mindsets, behaviors. What's going on in terms of all of those things that make up an organizational ecosystem. And in the concept of that, where might we start? In terms of thinking about those aspects and how we need to shift. How they're structured or framed that might start to move the needle to create, a different behavior. Because it all comes down to mindsets and behaviors, right? Mindsets, behaviors, values, being able to respect values of others. Yeah, so.
And just very quickly on something that Ashley said, and I think it's a really super important point to stress, is this requires investment, not just resource, not just budget, but actual time investment, and there's probably no better recent example than when the pandemic struck back in 2020, and an awful lot of D&I roles or D&I teams were furloughed, put to one side, or put on other projects. And I think those organisations that really take this seriously kept going. It was very challenging. There was a lot of stuff going on, but the investment is really, really critical.
Yeah, and I'm just going to give one last comment, building on something Leo said about, they aren't there at the top, which Vyla and I run the Leadership Institute here at the school, and we've done an annual survey on boards. And for like 3 or 4 years running, we asked them, how much various demographic diversity, like how much are you talking about this in your boardroom, right? And there's a lot of talk about gender, right? So virtually every board is talking about that. Increasingly, boards are talking about race, ethnicity these days. And then we asked about a whole bunch of other things. And LGBTQ plus is always at the bottom at around 1 or 2% max. And so I'm following up with interviews as I'm interviewing directors in the big FTSE companies, just asking, so why do you think this is? And the overwhelming response is, I don't know. There's bound to be some, gay men in the closet in here anyway. Number one, as a justification, and number two, I'm not clear what LGBTQ plus would have anything to say that's relevant to the board discussion. I'm like, all right then. It just is not on their radar screen at the top. We are not on that radar screen at all. And I still keep running into it, and I still keep finding it shocking when many other groups are on that agenda, right? This one, not so much. All right, we've probably got time for, do we have time for one more question? Yeah, one more question. Somebody want to, you got to.
There's one right there too.
Right? Okay.
Hello.
Great.
Hello. Hi. Thank you very much. We talk a lot about the kind of education piece for allies, and I think when I think of people who've told me that they're an ally to the LGBTQ plus community, it's almost exclusively women. How do we get through to heterosexual men who may be a little nervous or, for one reason or another, less receptive to kind of embracing and supporting the community?
Well, I can only share a couple of personal experiences on that. And the men, the straight men allies who've been brilliant with me, and I have had a couple of them in my life, are the ones who aren't scared of being labeled potentially gay by being involved with and discussing something with a gay man, right? It's about their identity, and their and the worst ones are the ones who are, who do have some of those feelings and of course are terrified anybody should ever find it out. But there are plenty of straight men, in my experience, who are totally comfortable and wouldn't, it's like, so what if I got that kind of a label, and have been amazing. So, what can, and that one, the thing is, I don't know exactly what I can do that will make them comfortable in who they are, right? And not then worry that their association with me somehow brings some kind of problem. So what I've done in my life is really when I'll say something, it's a bit stereotypical gay. Talk about, RuPaul's Drag Race or something like that, right? And watch how they respond. And if they're kind of like freaked out about it, I usually have to, feel like I need to be careful, right? And I back away a little bit and think if it's going to be helpful, it's going to be a long-term project versus those who just jump right in, they're totally comfortable. And then I know I can be totally out. I can start talking to them. And, most of that, quite a number of them have been just incredibly supportive. That's the way I've dealt with it. I don't know if anybody else is completely different.
I would say as a woman ally, I would say that The most effective thing, at least in our company, is to make the business case. So it's the opposite almost of RuPaul, right? So, to convince, for example, our executive committee or the leadership of our firm, we always present, the importance of the community as potential recruits, as, people, the talent that we have within the company, and make the business case for why it's important to, continue to support and to ally. I have to admit, though, that it's not often necessary, but when we do need to, we use that. Would you, I have two BCGers sitting in the front row here. Would you agree with that? Yeah. Yeah, okay.
What we just said, that is it really like, going back also to the proper question, is it our responsibility as queer people to create a comfort zone for straight people? Is it really like that, or are straight people that should force themselves a little bit to get out of the comfort zone and study a little bit more? Like, maybe, I don't know, that's my thought, but curious to know what you think.
Yeah.
Well, there's what's the right answer to that question, and then the reality of the world, right? And the reality of the world is it has to be a kind of two-way street, and that's why I do what I do. I kind of test the waters, right? This one's going to be fine. This one's a project, and yet, they want to do the right thing, but there's that residual homophobia that they're experiencing, right? So how can I help them, right, get a bit more comfortable? And when they get more comfortable, then they see, that it's that there's a positive outcome both for that person and for me in it. But they can, in my experience, there's a little project there, and it's getting over their residual homophobia.
And I think we also have to remember that for many, many years, and rightly so, LGBTQ plus networks were relatively exclusive to that community. And so for many years, the very people we're talking about, the allies, and particularly some of the senior straight men, white men, were not invited to stuff. And then suddenly we open up the floodgates and say, yeah, you can join this, come to this. And they're not sure. And I think to your point, we have to create, we have to give them a sign that it's actually okay and that we would welcome their involvement and their inputs. And I think also to reassure them that they may get something wrong and that's okay. I think a lot of people are just very afraid of saying the wrong thing. And, we have to, let them have that space where they can try and understand a bit more about, the community and what being an ally means.
Yeah, but I can't tell you the number of times I've had students approach me, like something in the, the report I was on a panel or speaking at the EUROUT conference. They're like, oh, does that mean you're gay, Randall? Like, wow, that's a news flash. But yes, but you don't have to be to speak at the EUROUT conference, right? And it wouldn't be great if they were more comfortable, more of them were more comfortable and not, because they're going to get those questions, right?
Randall, can I pick up something you said, which I think was a beautiful thing you said? The homophobia comes from within, for sure. And I don't know if anyone in the room has ever done Jungian therapy, as in Carl Gustav Jung. He's the guy. He's the guy, because he's completely forward-looking. He says, like, depression is your friend, because it's your soul telling you that your life is a bit bullshit and it deserves better than this. So Jung is really cool. But one of the things Jung says is there is this psychological mechanism, which is basically projection, where what you are unable to accept in yourself or what you're afraid of in yourself, you will disavow and you'll project it and develop a hostile attitude to it on someone else. So there's something around, to your great question, and I love the opening question. There's something around recognizing that, maybe recognizing where they may be coming from, and allowing some of the heat to come out of it, and then probably, quietly slip them the number of a Jungian therapist to help them do the journey. But I think it's not on the gay community to do that. Yeah. It's on all of us to sort out our own stuff, for sure.
and I guess I would add, encouraging folks not to feel uncomfortable acknowledging somebody's discomfort. I'm talking to you. Actually, I have a sense, or how are you doing? I have a sense you might be a bit anxious. Am I, a bit of testing? I don't know. That's just something that came into my head. And, to this question, if you're finding, it's, women, females who you think are allies, how might you partner with them in conversations with men, right? In a way that you might, that partnership could be used to shift a dynamic in the conversation. Don't know.
Great, thank you. I think we've been given the it's time to end signal. So,
Okay.
but one thing I will reinforce in what Vyla just said is that kind of, having worked with Vyla closely for a decade now, that kind of like, I'm feeling some anxiety going on here, in this discussion. Can we talk about it, right? And has drawn out some of the most amazingly wonderful conversations that we have ever had, and not to be afraid of that, right? They can choose to just shut it down and not talk about it, and we've seen that, but we've also seen people acknowledge and talk about it, and we end up in a much better place. So it does actually work. Great. Thank you, panelists. Great conversation.
Thank you.